Very good morning.
All right, good morning. Secretary General will read a statement, and then we'll take a few questions.
Ladies and gentlemen of the media, good morning. It's a great pleasure to be with all of you again. Today, I'm announcing that in the exercise of my good offices, I've asked Martin Griffiths, the coordinator of our humanitarian work worldwide, immediately to explore with the parties involved the possible agreements and arrangements for a humanitarian ceasefire in Ukraine. Since the beginning of the Russian invasion 1 month ago, the war has led to the senseless loss of thousands of lives, the displacement of 10 million people, mainly women and children, the systematic destruction of essential infrastructure, and skyrocketing food and energy prices worldwide. This must stop. The United Nations is doing everything in its power to support people whose lives have been overturned by the war. In the past months, beyond their support to refugee hosting countries, our humanitarian agencies and their partners have reached nearly 900,000 people, mainly in eastern Ukraine, with food, shelter, blankets, medicine, bottled water, and hygiene supplies. There are now more than 1,000 United Nations personnel in the country, working via 8 humanitarian hubs in Dnipro, Vinnytsia, Lviv, Uzhhorod, Chernivtsi, Mukachevo, Luhansk, and Donetsk. The World Food Programme and partners reached 800,000 people in the past months and are scaling up to reach 1.2 million people by mid-April. The World Health Organization and partners have reached more than 500,000 people in the most vulnerable areas with emergency health, trauma, and surgery kits. Just today, a convoy of trucks brought food, medical, and other relief supplies from WFP, WHO, UNHCR, UNICEF to Kharkiv to be delivered by our national partners to thousands of people in hard-hit areas. Our agencies and partners are procuring vital supplies and setting up pipelines for deliveries throughout Ukraine in the coming weeks. But let's be clear. The solution to this humanitarian tragedy is not humanitarian. It is political. I'm therefore appealing for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire to allow for progress in serious political negotiations aiming at reaching a peace agreement based on the principles of the United Nations Charter. A cessation of hostilities will allow essential humanitarian aid to be delivered and enable civilians to move around safely. It will save lives, prevent suffering, and protect civilians. I hope a ceasefire will also help to address the global consequences of this war, which risks compounding the deep hunger crisis in many developing countries that already lack fiscal space to invest in their recovery from the pandemic and now face soaring food and energy costs. I strongly appeal to the parties to this conflict and to the international community as a whole to work with us for peace in solidarity with the people of Ukraine and across the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. Can you expand a bit on what Mr. Griffiths is being asked to do, and is he going to go to the region? Is he going to try and meet with senior leaders, both in Moscow and in Ukraine? And how quickly is he going to basically start this peace effort?
Well, he will immediately start. He's in Kabul today and will be coming back. And He already made some contacts, and of course, I hope that we will be able to go to both Moscow and Kiev as soon as that becomes possible. It's very important to establish a serious dialogue with both parties in relation to the possibility of this humanitarian ceasefire.
And you mentioned the appeal to the rest of the world. Are you asking the European Union, other regional organizations?
No, I've been in close contact with several countries that have been talking to the parties at the highest level in order to explore the different forms of mediation leading to a political solution. I've been in very close contact with our Turkish friends, with Qatar, with Israel, with India, China, but also France, Germany. And it is my belief that all these efforts are essential in order to create the conditions to allow for finally this war to come to an end.
And are all those countries supporting this effort?
I hope so.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. You mentioned you're calling for the immediate ceasefire in your intervention. As far as you remember, the draft resolution considered last week by the Security Council contained the provisions about the negotiated ceasefire, but the Security Council failed to adopt it. Do you consider it as a mistake? And the second question, please, what are your expectations of tomorrow's humanitarian meeting by the Security Council in Ukraine?
Well, first of all, the Security Council decides whatever the Security Council decides, but that doesn't mean that anyone in the Security Council is against a negotiated ceasefire, as you mentioned. So I strongly hope that there will be goodwill from all sides in order for this ceasefire to take place. And I believe the briefing tomorrow will be a humanitarian briefing about the humanitarian situation. As far as I know, there will be elements of our humanitarian agencies that will be briefing the Security Council.
Sharon Price, please.
Secretary General, Russian leaders at the highest levels continue to assert their right to use nuclear weapons if and when a scenario is required for such a move. We are also seeing reports of nuclear facilities in Ukraine being targeted by strikes. Are you concerned that we are now on the cusp of either a biological conflict here or a nuclear war?
Well, I was this morning in contact with the Director General of International Agency of International Atomic Energy Agency. And there will be a number of very important initiatives by IAEA in the next few days in order to guarantee the security of the nuclear facilities inside Ukraine. And I know that there is a very close contact of Rafael Grossi to both the Russian and the Ukrainian authorities on this, and he has my full support in the initiatives that will take in the next few days. On the other hand, I can't imagine the possibility of having a nuclear, a biological, or a chemical war in this scenario. That would be would be something that I believe will be avoided. It must be avoided.
Thank you. It's Pamela Falk from CBS News, Secretary General. Is there any reason you have to believe that a ceasefire is actually being agreed to by the two sides, by Russia in particular? And is there any way the UN can enforce that if a ceasefire comes into play? Thank you.
Well, as a matter of fact, I've been hearing in different positions taken by both the Ukrainians and the Russian Federation in the motion that was presented to the Security Council, reference to a ceasefire. So I think this is the moment in which I believe it makes sense for the UN to assume the initiative. And of course, it depends on the will of the parties when a ceasefire is established to define the arrangements necessary to make the ceasefire persist.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sudan and beyond. My delegation commends Special Representative Perthes and UNITANS for the first round of inclusive consultations. This is a task that the Council clearly mandates to the Special Political Mission in Sudan. We know that this is not a straightforward duty. The first round has stimulated Sudan to reach further convergence, so praise and support here are indeed in order. These broad consultations have also enabled diverse voices to take part in the political debate once again. Women, men, girls, boys, young Sudanese citizens have all been part of the transformation since 2019. Inclusivity is key on the way forward, so it should be built from now on. No number of United Nations foreign-led processes are even close to replace local ownership, though. Sudanese leadership, Sudanese guidance, Sudanese inputs are all essential to build consensus and then help breaking the stalemate that has beset politics in Sudan. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Brazil and give the floor to Mexico.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Of course, my delegation would like to join in the thanks expressed to Special Representative Perthes for his briefing. At the last meeting of this Council, the Special Representative began a process of consultations in a very difficult, delicate political situation aimed at diffusing the political stalemate. We have followed very closely the results of this process, and here and now I would like to recognize the leadership of Mr. Perthes of UNITAMS. Once the first stage of the consultations is concluded by the Special Representative, it will be fundamental that the parties assume their responsibilities in order to move forward in the same constructive spirit in which they took part in these initial consultations. And now it's up to the Sudanese to define the path forward for the political process that will enable them to prepare a roadmap. Although there are differences, there are also areas of consensus, and that's where we need to concentrate. It will be fundamental to give priority to those aspects that can promote confidence building. Only on the basis of trust will it be possible to work on the more controversial aspects. We recognize the inclusive process that has been begun. The voices of civil society, political parties have been heard, as well as activists, the world of academia, and journalists, to mention just a few. It is particularly important that we highlight that a third of those that participated in these talks were women and representatives of women's rights organizations. We hope that the next stage will take into account the conclusions contained in the synthesis document. The content of that document is a reflection of the priorities of the Sudanese people in order to achieve the goals of the revolution. We are also carefully following the next phase of the process and the involvement of the United Nations, the African Union, and, of course, of IGAD. Madam President, notwithstanding these encouraging developments, we are concerned about the situation of insecurity, which risks endangering the political process. The violence in Darfur and in other parts of the country continues to be unacceptable. We condemn inter-community violence, as well as sexual aggression against women and serious violations of the rights of children, including the disappearance of minors. It's deplorable that the authorization of broad powers that were given to the security forces in order to inverted commas, to deal with the manifestations in recent months has been translated into an abuse of force and into violations of human rights. In this context, it is critical that there be a direct interaction with the expert designated by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in order to assess the situation in Sudan. And we must once again call upon the authorities of Sudan to fully cooperate with the International Criminal Court. Having impartial information is fundamental. The Working Group on Children in Armed Conflict has been very clear in saying that the lack of access and deterioration in the security situation prevents them obtaining precise information on the impact of the armed conflict. Madam President, in recent months, we've seen an increase, 500,000, in the number of people experiencing food insecurity, for a total of almost 10 million people. The drought has significantly affected sectors of agriculture and cattle farming, and these shortages are deplorable, as well as the attacks and pillaging of the supplies and offices of the World Food Programme in El Fasher. These attacks have led to the suspension of operations over the course of weeks, which left 730,000 people without assistance. We call upon the authorities to guarantee security both for humanitarian staff as well as for the supplies that they provide. I conclude with Mexico's call to the Sudanese authorities to redouble efforts to guarantee full implementation of the National Plan for the Protection of Civilians and to make progress in the implementation of the Juba Peace Agreement. These steps undoubtedly are essential for the stabilization of the country. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Mexico for his statement, and I will now present a statement in my capacity as representative of UAE. I thank the Special Representative, the Secretary General Volker Perthes, for his briefing on the latest updates and developments in Sudan, including the UN initiative to facilitate a Sudanese-led dialogue. I also welcome the representative of Sudan, Mr. Ammar Mohammed, to this meeting. The UAE welcomes the efforts made by the UN in facilitating consultations with Sudanese stakeholders to forge a common understanding that will push the transitional period forward. In this regard, we highlight the active and widespread participation in the consultations, including women and youth, as well as the consultations held with international and regional partners, including the AU and IGAD, which demonstrate the widespread support for Sudanese-owned and led political transition that fulfills the aspirations of the Sudanese people, that brotherly people. Regarding the social, economic, and humanitarian situation in Sudan, and despite the significant and far-reaching economic reforms that Sudan has implemented over the last 2 years in cooperation with international partners as a part of its transition, the suspension of international assistance has negatively affected its economy. Inflation averaged 350% in 2021. Food prices sharply increased, and the provision of basic goods and services is severely constrained. The dire economic situation is further exacerbated by climate change and the disruption of the agricultural season. It is now projected that over 14 million people will require humanitarian assistance in 2022, which underlines the importance of heeding the Secretary General's call for the member states to respond swiftly to the humanitarian needs in Sudan. As part of our presidency's commitment to bring attention to implementation of Resolution 2565, I also highlight that less than 5% of Sudan's people are fully vaccinated against COVID-19, which requires investment in Sudan's health system and combining vaccination efforts with other essential services. With regard to the security situation in some parts of Sudan, we recognize the important steps undertaken by the authorities in Sudan to address these challenges. We also view the role of the Darfur Permanent Ceasefire Committee as critical and important in the context of completing the integration of forces and beginning the implementation of the security arrangements outlined under the Juba Peace Agreement. We join the Secretary General in welcoming the steps to operationalize the committee, which requires international donors to allocate adequate logistical and financial resources to carry out its tasks. In conclusion, we also wish to reiterate that our primary responsibility must be to incentivize greater progress and a successful political transition in Sudan. The Sudanese people have shown their determination to overcome this difficult period and build an inclusive, stable, and prosperous Sudan. We call on the friends and partners of Sudan, including the Council, to support the aspirations of the Sudanese people in a manner that respects Sudan's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity and national unity. Thank you. I shall now resume my function as President of the Council. I give the floor to the representative of Sudan. Thank you, Madam President. We have taken note of the briefing presented by Mr. Volker Perthes today, the Special Representative of Secretary General and Head of the UNITAMS. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, the Sudanese scene is witnessing a massive movement to ensure the success of the political transition in Sudan and put it back on track towards democracy, freedom, peace, and justice. It is shaping a future for Sudan based on foundations that would strengthen state entities and establish a system of governance that guarantees the values of the glorious December Revolution. In this vein, actors in the Sudanese political scene continue to engage for a national dialogue that would preserve the gains achieved thanks to Sudan's youth's determination and sacrifices for a bright future that they and the country deserve. In this regard, we note that the challenges of the political transition in Sudan since April 2019 have reinforced the conviction of Sudan's transition partners, be they civilians or military, that we must guarantee the success of the transition period to achieve the desired goals. Madam President, I would like to focus on the following 3 points on the political, security, and economic situation in the Sudan. First, surmounting the current political situation in the Sudan and restoring national harmony requires consensus on a comprehensive vision based on 4 elements put forward by the President of the Sovereignty Council, namely, to engage in an in-depth dialogue involving all of the political and social actors in the country without exception, except the former governing party. Establishing a government and undertaking amendments to the constitutional document to keep pace with these changes, and finally to hold free and fair elections at the end of the transitional period. The consultations currently carried out by UNITAMS must hopefully be in line with this perspective. The Sudanese political leadership has welcomed the role of the mission, provided that the entire process is Sudanese-owned. The UNITAM's role must be limited to facilitating dialogue between the parties without attempting to influence the outcomes of the consultations. We also reiterate the need to unify efforts between the UNITAMS and that of the African Union. Sudan believes that the AU plays a key and important role in the success of the transitional period in the Sudan. Thus, it must be involved in respect of the sovereignty sphere of this continental organization. Second, with regard to the security situation and the implementation of the Juba Peace Agreement, we know that the Sudanese government is coordinating fully with the partners of the peace process to implement the terms of this agreement. Thus, the president of the Sovereignty Council, has visited Al-Fasher in Darfur last month, where he headed a meeting of the Joint Supreme Council on the security arrangements. He also headed a meeting of the PCC. At the end of this visit, the Joint Supreme Council issued a number of resolutions leading to the establishment of the Task Force of the Maintenance of Security and Protection of Civilians, the regrouping of the forces of the peace process outside the cities, to begin to rehabilitate and reintegrate them into the regular forces or demobilize them and reintegrate them into society, as well as launching campaigns to combat criminal acts such as those against the former headquarters of the UNAMID and some government warehouses and other United Nations agencies buildings. As I made clear in our statement on the chairman of the Sanctions Committee established pursuant to Resolution 1591, the greatest challenge facing the implementation of the Juba Peace Agreement at present is the failure of the parties and the international entities to fulfill their financial obligations and commitments to the convention. And rather the agreement, the Sudanese government is doing its utmost to meet the benefits of peace under delicate economic conditions. Therefore, we launch another appeal to the international community to provide financial support to complete the implementation of all the terms of this agreement, especially since the security arrangements of the Juba Peace Agreement and the related DRR are very costly and complex in terms of their organizational, logistical, and financial aspects. Third, Sudan continues to implement economic reform measures which are quite severe on large segments of our citizens. However, they are necessary to address the inherited distortions in the structure of the Sudanese economy. Among the measures taken by Sudan over the past few days is the complete liberalization of the exchange rate of the Sudanese pound against foreign currencies, so that banks and exchange companies can determine and announce the prices of the sale and purchase of foreign currencies without intervention from the central bank. This is part of an integrated and sustainable reform monetary policy that aims at stabilizing the exchange rate and increasing the ability of the banking system to attract resources. We expect that these measures would have positive impact on the banking system and on the macroeconomics in the medium and long term. Madam President, in order for these economic reforms to achieve their desired goals, we look forward to resuming cooperation and development assistance from our bilateral partners keen on the success of our transitional period in the Sudan, as well as from international financial institutions. This would mitigate the effects of the reforms and reduce the external debt burden to which Sudan has qualified by taking the necessary steps in order with the HIPC initiative to complete the treatment of the inherited economic distortions. In this context, we hope to resume support for the social protection program known as Thamara in order to contribute to addressing some of the social conditions and enabling economic reforms to achieve their objectives. The international community must also fulfill its responsibility by providing all aspects of humanitarian assistance to hundreds of refugees from neighboring countries hosted by the Sudan. Ladies and gentlemen, we have noted that the report of the Secretary General, considered by this committee as contained in document S/2022/172, has focused heavily on your Council's briefing of the developments of the situation in the Sudan, as if the work of the UNITAM's mission is limited to reporting to the Council on the situation in the Sudan. Of course, the UNITAMS has 4 strategic objectives as provided for by the Security Council resolution that renewed its mandate last month. However, we are concerned that the mission's work in implementing such objectives was not up to the level. Over the reporting period, the mission did not achieve much progress. Although this report covers the past 3 months, however, it unnecessarily returned to previous events that are not covered by the reporting period of the Council to display it in a manner that is not factual. In addition, the report included many exaggerated information or wrong, especially the part on the allegations of sexual violence and violation of human rights. Most of what has been incorporated in the report is far from true and is not similar to the government reports of these events. Thus, for the Security Council to be capable of objectively considering the situation in Sudan and assessing it rightfully, setting events in context, the reports of the mission must be more credible, impartial, and professional. And we have provided your august council with the comments on the report. To conclude, Madam President, I would like to emphasize that the partners of the transition period in Sudan will continue their effort to make the transition a success while affirming our commitment to dialogue as an indispensable way to address the challenges of the political transition in Sudan. We also renew our commitment to work with the international community to meet the challenges that may stand in the way of the Sudan transition process in order to achieve the goals we all aspire for. Thank you, Madam President. I thank the representative of the Sudan for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I call members of the Council for informal consultations in the consultation chamber to continue our discussion of this issue.
This consultations room, and the format will be +1 and masked for this week. رفعت الجلسة.
The meeting is adjourned.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Starting with the General Assembly Hall, underway is the preparatory meeting entitled Stockholm Plus 50, A Healthy Planet for the Prosperity for All, Our Responsibility, Our Opportunity. In his opening remarks, the President of the General Assembly, Abdullah Shahid, spoke about the need to be united and act quickly to stem the impact of climate change. He said, "There is hope. We have the knowledge and we have the capacity. All that remains is summoning the political will to translate it into action." Those remarks were delivered by Ambassador Osama Mahmoud Abdel Khalek Mahmoud, the permanent representative of Egypt to the United Nations, and one of the General Assembly vice presidents. The opening segment also included remarks from Ms. Annika Strandhäll, the Sweden's Minister for Climate and the Environment, and Mr. Kariko Tobiko, the Kenyan Minister of Environment and Forestry, as well as Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed. And the Stockholm Plus 50 International Conference will be held on 2nd and 3rd June. Turning to the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index for Small Island Developing States, the Office of the President of the General Assembly today held the first meeting with the high-level panel of experts on the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index. This is an index that would identify measures of development that go beyond GDP per capita. You will recall that President Abdullah Shahid met with the co-chairs on 18th of March. Those co-chairs are Mr. Gaston Brown, the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, and Ms. Erna Solberg, the Prime Minister of Norway. And the panel will keep member states regularly briefed on the work and ensure that all partners in the process are consulted. Over the weekend, President Shahid was the keynote speaker in the opening of the 20th Doha Forum. He spoke under the title of Transforming for a New Era, focusing on 4 main areas: geopolitical alliances and international relations, financial system and economic development, defense, cyber and food security, and climate change and sustainability. While in Doha, President Abdullah Shahid met with His Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, Emir of the State of Qatar. He also met with the Qatari Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani. And all costs for the visit were generously funded by the State of Qatar. That's everything that I have for you for today. Do you have any questions for me? I don't see any questions in the room, and I don't see anything in the chat. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Crime and corruption pose a major threat to the environment. Wildlife and human trafficking, crimes in the fisheries sector, illegal exploitation of natural resources and sea pollution affect biodiversity, undermine human health, socioeconomic development, and pose security risks to people and states. There is a real need to strengthen the protection of the environment through strong criminal justice measures. Stockholm Plus 50, in particular, the Leadership Dialogue 1, provides an opportunity to highlight the need to address crimes that affect the environment and to reflect on how the tools of the criminal justice systems can contribute to our collective efforts to achieve a healthy planet and prosperity of all. UNODC recommends including action against crimes that affect the environment as one of the priorities for advancing the fulfillment of the human rights to a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. This includes effective, proportionate, and dissuasive legal frameworks, strengthening national and international criminal justice efforts, fostering effective cooperation, and preventive corruption. By improving how member states address the most serious environmental offenses, the international community will more effectively tackle the climate crisis, environmental degradation, pollution, and increase the accountability of all actors causing such environmental harms. So we very much look forward to contributing to a successful Stockholm Plus 50 conference. I thank you very much.
I thank the representative for the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, and I give the floor to Morocco for the next contribution.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you, co-chairs. Allow me to begin by paying tribute to your leadership, and I thank you for organising this preparatory dialogue ahead of the Stockholm Plus 50 international meeting planned to be held in June on the initiative of Sweden and Kenya. It's clear that environmental degradation is a clear fact, as was confirmed by the latest report of the IPCC. It's a threat that we all have to face together. For its part, the Kingdom of Morocco, which is a low greenhouse gas emitter, has committed to reducing by 45% its greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Moreover, my country has decided to step up its renewable energy targets to, by 2030, have 50% of our energy coming from clean resources. Our national mobilization towards this is strengthening synergies between key economy sectors and environmental governance. Within the UN, Morocco was a main co-sponsor, putting forward a resolution on a healthy, clean environment for human rights. This is part of a long process of an interconnection between the environment and human rights, and it reaffirms the universal recognition of the environment as a bearer of human rights, which we are particularly proud of. Africa is unfairly facing the consequences of climate change, and the first Action Summit organized in Marrakesh led to an unprecedented momentum through the launch of 3 African climate summits in 3 different regional areas. These 3 commissions are now operational and have the resolute commitment from Morocco. Through Stockholm Plus 50, we need to further mobilize to further this encouraging signs. Allow me to say that we need to have sustainable funding and focus on those countries that need our help the most, as well as to have effective transfers of technology and know-how towards developing countries. These are the imperatives that should guide us if we want to achieve our noble environmental goals 50 years after the adoption of the Stockholm Declaration. Morocco, that was recently chair of UNEA 6, will make commitments for climate action and environmental protection, and you can count on our support to ensure the success of Stockholm Plus 50. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Morocco, and I give the floor to Peru.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Allow me to begin by thanking Kenya and Sweden, as well as the 6 co-chairs that are chairing the 3 leadership dialogues, and the President of the General Assembly, the Executive Director of UNDP and UNEP. Peru was a sponsor of the resolution on the beginning of negotiations against plastics pollution, and we welcome the resolution adopted in Nairobi. This is a specific way of having a healthier planet. We need to have specific targets such as this, and Stockholm Plus 50 is one example of this. I'd like to focus on one issue that we believe should be delved into in greater detail. Firstly, many of my colleagues have mentioned nature-based solutions, and this is an example of what we mean by nature-based solutions. Over the last 5 years, Peru has identified 80 different products from nature that can contribute to healthy food to reduce levels of malnutrition, particularly for the most vulnerable rural economies, and to foster local economies through bio-businesses, while also promoting the conservation of these resources. We see the showcasing of products from diversity and how they implement the 3 pillars of the 2030 agenda, the social, economic, and environmental. Obviously, for this, we need to have financial resources and, above all, infrastructure, investment in natural infrastructure, such as retribution mechanisms, etc.
Obviously, financial markets are also a part of this, and something that we could look at, that we think we could look at, is also something that we've been implementing in Peru, which is a roadmap for green funding. It seeks to ensure that local economies also promote the green economy, and also working with all public-private businesses that provide financial resources to businesses that provide goods and services related to this, and also to the environmental responsibility. You can, of course, count on the decisive support of my country in the preparations for the meeting in July, and also for the full implementation of the 3 pillars of the 2030 agenda. I'd like to close with a question. How do you think that the co-chairs of each dialogue could proceed to receive the inputs from all of the countries ahead of the meeting later this year? Thank you.
I thank the representative of Peru, and I would now like to give the floor to the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, followed by the United Arab Emirates and the Netherlands. Thank you.
Madam Chair, on behalf of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, I thank the President of the General Assembly and the co-hosts, the government of Kenya and Sweden, for providing us the opportunity to participate in today's meeting in the lead-up to Stockholm Plus 50. As the largest humanitarian network, the IFRC and our 192 national societies are witnessing firsthand how, within the last 50 years since the Stockholm Conference, climate change, ecosystem degradation, and biodiversity loss are leading to food insecurity, water scarcity, health impacts, and the loss of livelihoods with direct humanitarian consequences. In the latest IPCC report, we read that the planetary crisis has become a humanitarian crisis. While according to the IFRC's World Disaster Report 2020, 83% of all disasters in the last decade were caused by weather and climate-related disasters, impacting over 1.7 billion people. Currently, in the Horn of Africa, for example, drought and land degradation are key drivers of food insecurity, water scarcity, and displacement, alongside conflict and economic and political drivers. As crises compound and increase in frequency and intensity, governments and key stakeholders need to invest in holistic and integrated approaches to strengthening resilience. Effective climate action, ecosystem restoration, fighting pollution, and disaster risk reduction at all levels need to be scaled up to reduce risk for vulnerable people and the ecosystems they depend on, including through integrated risk management, investments in adaptation, anticipatory action, and nature-based solutions. Madam Chair, as we look ahead to Stockholm Plus 50 in June, we ask for the conference outcomes to recognize that the planetary crisis is already a humanitarian crisis. The engagement of humanitarian sector is essential, as it is a key stakeholder in responding to the planetary crisis that is already happening. The outcome should recognize the importance of local action that reaches and empowers people and community in vulnerable situations, is equitable, and leaves no one behind. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, and I give the floor to the United Arab Emirates.
شكرا سيدتي الرئيسة.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excellencies, dear colleagues, we welcome Sweden and Kenya for their organization of today's meeting for the preparations for Stockholm Plus 50. We believe that the meeting will be an important platform to increase expectations and to ensure that we have tangible recommendations to protect the climate and environment. For the 28th Conference of State Parties, we are determined to ensure tangible outcomes to build on Stockholm Plus 50. I'd like to underscore 5 particular areas that we believe are particularly important for the Stockholm Plus 50 conference. particularly during this decade of action for nutrition, including through the Conference of States Parties on Climate Change. Firstly, we welcome any coordination on funding and the implementation of the biodiversity goal for 2030 under the UNFCCC. Secondly, it's particularly necessary to invest in gender equality so as to guarantee the success of any efforts to protect the environment. In the context of the objectives set by the Secretary General to ensure that we have 15% of the peacebuilding budget dedicated to gender parity, we are determined to do the same. Thirdly, renewable energy is an exceptional way of relieving suffering within the environment and to create jobs. We would like to see a direct appeal at the Stockholm Plus 50 meeting to speed up work in that direction. Fourthly, and in parallel, agriculture also represents a great economic opportunity, particularly to face the loss of biodiversity. We believe that the Agricultural Creativity Initiative is a particularly important step because it enjoys the participation of 39 states and it calls for new investment that will focus on the environment and on economic opportunities as well as fighting climate change. Finally, we are in favor of any initiatives aimed at supporting the states that are affected by climate change. By way of conclusion, we look forward to the conclusions of this conference and the resolution therefrom, and we will work at all efforts to ensure that becomes a reality. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United Arab Emirates for his contribution, and I would like to give the floor to the Netherlands.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor. Thank you, dear co-chairs, for convening this preparatory meeting and for your tireless efforts to make Stockholm Plus 50 a success. In the interest of time, let me jump immediately to the 3 points we want to make today in our national capacity: on circular economy, on nature-based solutions, and on inclusion of youth. First, on the circular economy. It is clear that consumption and production patterns are a main driver of planetary health and equity crises. So moving from a linear to a circular economy is, in our view, essential to solve the triple planetary crisis and achieve the SDGs. There is a need to align efforts across the public and private sector and incentivize a shift to more sustainable value chains. A sectoral value chain approach can benefit this transition. And let's be ambitious. Let's set clear goals. Nationally, we have set as a target to have a 100% circular economy by 2050 and a 50% circular economy by 2030. Secondly, we would like to highlight the importance of nature-based solutions. This is increasingly recognized as a promising tool to address the triple planetary crisis by strengthening adaptive capacity and mitigation measures while simultaneously enhancing the quality of the natural environment. And we therefore welcome the definition of nature-based solutions as agreed upon at UNEA, which is a landmark for discussions on the environment within a multilateral framework. Mutual learning through knowledge sharing and exchange of best practices is vital to promote and successfully implement nature-based solutions, including water-related adaptation. And finally, I would like to highlight the importance of multi-stakeholder participation, and we already heard some excellent input today, and in particular, the importance of youth. Ultimately, we are trying to solve this triple planetary crisis in order to make sure that our children will inherit a more just and sustainable world. It is about their present and their future, and therefore it is vital that they have a seat at the table and that their voices are heard. And we look forward to engaging further on these topics today and during Stockholm Plus 50 in a constructive manner. And like our colleague from Antigua and Barbuda has said, we have no time to waste. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to thank the representative from the Netherlands. And we will now have a recorded message from the Population, Health and Environment Ethiopia Consortium that will then be followed by Belize and China.
Greetings from Ethiopia. I'm Fraser Hayes from PH Ethiopia Consortium, speaking on behalf of Women Major Group. We'd like to extend our profound gratitude for the opportunity as we stand before you to emphasize on the need for actions to achieve a healthy environment and prosperity for all. We'd like to underline the need for gender-just, rights-based biodiversity conservation, which is also discussed in the meetings of subsidiary bodies of the CBD at the moment. We support the emphasis of leadership dialogue on the rights of indigenous people and local communities, but are very concerned the text is currently gender blind, which is not concurrent with existing UN policies, the CBD Gender Plan of Action, and other UN commitments. Moreover, we'd like to bring to the attention of all actors the need for equitable and fair utilization of natural resources among countries and the need to eradicate the prevalence of conflicts and wars around the world, which is also worsening